Hey, again, last call for the 1 p.m. workshop with the Children's Atlas of Wine. To 8. These numbers stay like they are. Hi, everybody. How's your fair going so far? Oh, just that good? My goodness. How's your fair going so far? All right. Well, we'll work on it. I'm kind of curious, just with a quick show of hands here, because I know, and this has always been the case, and it's one of the things I love about this space. We're all coming from a lot of different places, and that kind of cuts intersectionally in a lot of different ways. I'm curious, how many people in the room would sort of make fermented beverages? Got a couple producers. How many people work in wine, work in restaurants, work for great. And how many people are curious drinkers who are just showing up and like tasting stuff? Excellent, thank you for coming. Helps me know how to pitch things. There's still always a degree of code switching, but what I should back up. My name is James. I have a project called the Children's Atlas of Wine, which maps underrated wine regions and overlooked grape varieties and the people who grow them. And I'm the education lead for ABV ferments. Today, what I thought we'd do in a kind of collaborative, workshopy, tasty, talky, fiddly pins and fabric, paper falling and then being put back up, Sharpies on colored paper type way, is talk about the sort of the timeline, the story we tell ourselves about the history of wine, and remake it. So we're going to do that in about 50 minutes. Easy, simple, definitely nothing complicated or fraught about it. And just to sort of just to give you a little sort of preview of how this is going to work, just to sort of prepare you psychologically. A couple things are going to happen. One, you're going to want to be prepared to talk to the people next to you. I think table by table is probably the best way to do this. You can kind of, you know, one end of the table to the other might be a little more difficult. So if you want to split into subgroups of 5 to 6 on either end, totally cool, recommended. There will be some tasting. You will be tasting different things. There are a lot of us in the room, and a bottle of wine has 24 and whatever ounces, and we are 45 people. So rather than give you like a quarter ounce of something, I'd like to give you an ounce and make you explain it to somebody who's never had it before. And we will be doing a little bit of getting up and moving around as well. So those are the parameters. There's going to be some getting up and moving. There's going to be some people talking who aren't me, thank God. There will be a little bit of tasting, and you might not be able to taste everything. So that's and there might be some drawing, some papers. Things will probably fall off the wall. Cool. Where I wanted to start this workshop, this collaborative process, is with a question. And it's a question I'm going to pose to you. You can talk briefly with each other about it, and we'll talk about it together. And the question is, what is traditional? What does tradition mean in wine? It's not a trick question. I'm aware that there are different answers. Feel free to go with your gut, with your first one. You don't have to outthink yourself. But when you think about what you expect, what you perceive, what you look for, what you hope for, what you might see in a bottle and a glass from a producer described to you by a rep trying to sell you something. What's tradition? Remember those groups that I told you to get in? We're gonna take 3 to 4 minutes, talk about it, and then we're gonna break out, and I'm curious to know what you have to say.
Or upside that, both in terms of timeline and in terms of like. Hey, wonderful people in the Zoom, feel free to share in the chat. What is tradition to you? What is tradition to you? Can't wait to hear y'all or more like read your replies.
That. And so, the terminology, is important for those of us who make games, but really, you're usually trying to sell something. Yeah, whether that's a political idea or.
Thank you for sharing. Kara notes that for them, tradition is culturally and regionally held,
This is just a
community
good
marker,
too. Yeah.
a land marker, intersection of community, knowledge, and land. Would love to hear more thoughts in the chat. What is tradition? Welcome, Anya. This is the Children's Atlas of Wine workshop. Right now, folks live at Bibin Sake are answering and discussing what is tradition. Folks in the Zoom are encouraged and welcome to add in the chat what tradition means to them. And feel free to reply to each other as well.
Yep. I'm eavesdropping. I was about to ask them. Yeah. Do you each want to take the last two? Let's do top one. Let's do this, and let's do this guy. It's sparkling, so it'll pour a little. Yeah, if you want to switch, you can switch.
Love that quote Kara has added into the chat. Tradition is a practice that connects present to past in a way that helps me understand myself, and love where I come from. Welcome to reading more thoughts from folks attending virtually.
How did we do? Did we solve a fundamentally insoluble question? Really quick lightning round. I'd love to hear a couple of the highlights of what we talked about. I don't have to start calling people, but if you feel moved to speak, anybody got some from their group? What about over here? Yeah.
Kind of local culture, local practices. Tradition is something that is can also be sort of structural. So it connect people in a place, structures are built around it. And it's something that's ritual based.
Cool. Awesome. So we have something that's maybe contextually dependent, something that's rooted in a specific place, and something that's sort of ritualized. Cool. Anybody else? Garrett Oliver, unsurprisingly, man with things to say.
I tend to think that traditional is a political slash marketing term.
We're supposed to fast forward to the end.
as we try to look at what is traditional, we are picking a point in time, for a thing that is generally dynamic over a long period of time. So it's possible, for example, for the people who make Budweiser to call their beer traditional because it's been made that way, say, for 120 years, even though it's almost entirely divorced from the roots of the style that it claims to be. So everybody picks a time, and a place where they fix in some ways what traditional means, even if that thing has been a moving target. And if you're a beer person, as I am, IPA is a great example. It meant something in the 1700s. It meant the same thing in 1850. It made almost the same thing in 1900. It made almost the same thing in 2002, and now it means nothing. Through kind of dispersion of the of our language around beer style, etc. So, is natural wine traditional? Is only Yamaha and Komodo style traditional? I think you pick a point and then you defend it.
I love that idea of picking a point in time, and we are going to literally and figuratively put a pin in that. Anybody else?
We talked about a lot of similar things to both of y'all who just spoke. We also talked a lot about the relation between tradition and expectation, and we started to question the idea of like to whom things are traditional. And we talked a lot about how it is a community thing, and it's experience and agreed upon amongst a community. And when you start to look outside of what people expect to take or expect something to be, it can often be called untraditional, but when you start to look at, again, whose tradition it is, perhaps it's actually just a tradition that you're not familiar with. So, yeah, I don't know if you guys want to.
No, I think that's a great point. And it sort of dovetails with some of the other points that brought up, but the idea that, tradition only means something in relation to a group of people who decide it means something.
It's very traditional.
Uh-huh. Anybody else on this side of the room? I think it's funny to have a room full of people who predominantly work in wine, because I do ask this question to regular folks who are just curious enough to come to a class. And all these points come up. And then also, there's often an interesting tension between people whose associations with tradition are negative, are sort of harmful. They're like, well, tradition to me means stuffiness, or it means gatekeeping, means being the feeling of not being welcome or being kept out of something, means serif fonts and chateaus, it means tasfons. Other people in the same room will jump, and again, regular drinkers will jump immediately to amphora and qvevri. We'll jump immediately to clay and kind of the ancient world. I want to return to Garrett's point about tradition being a point that you pick in time. Because that's sort of exactly what we're going to do today. And I was sort of thinking in terms of bookends in two very different ways. One is the desperate and very human antiquity of us as people fermenting. If you look at the domestication of fruit and you look at the histories of fermentation, like 10,000 years ago, plus or minus, is sort of as far back as our evidence goes, but it goes that far back almost everywhere. You have apples being domesticated in Central Asia. You have grapevines being domesticated in the Caucasus. You have blueberries being cultivated by native peoples in Maine post-glacial retreat. And as soon as people invent something that is durable enough to survive in the archaeological record so that we can look at it and find evidence of fermentation, they're already fermenting. And in fact, the archaeological sites that we're finding, like airlocked caves in Armenia, are like men and women buried with drinking horns around buried clay vessels and crush pads. And the broken vessels have like grapes, on them. In other words, this is already a practice. This isn't somebody just figured out how to do this. This is a practice that's already like culturally embedded and ritualized. So there's this one sense in which there are these incredibly deep roots to kind of fundamentally what we're celebrating here today, which is fermenting things. Big picture. And the flip side is the sort of extraordinary recency, the nowness, or the what does tomorrow look like of what we talk about here and what we're doing. I went through and like painstakingly looked up everybody's first vintage, all the producers that are pouring today. And in 2016, 80%, 8 in 10 of the people who make ferments in this room had not yet bottled their first vintage. So, and if that's 8 in 10 just seemed like a fun number. If I took that up to 2018 or 2020, it would still be a lot of us. So a lot of what we're tasting is fundamentally kind of brand new in like that very literal sense. And so that sort of tension, I think invites the question of, well, how do we situate this stuff in context? And I think one approach might be, well, this new stuff is new and we're going to talk about it like it's weird and strange and kind of came out of nowhere. And for whatever reason, my brain doesn't work like that. And so, what I want us to think about today is sort of how surprisingly deep the things that feel new and surprising and odd or eccentric or out of left field, how surprisingly deep the roots of those things go if we tell ourselves a slightly different story of why. So up here in the white is mostly a kind of, but I ran out of space and also it was 3 in the morning. So this could be twice as long, but a kind of gesso story about a lot of the things that we talk about when we talk about the regular history of wine. Here's a tiny fraternity in London inventing the Masters of Wine and the Court of Master Sommeliers. There's phylloxera. Look, glass bottles. We're sealing them with corks now. Burgundy. We got some oak barrels in Rome. We've got first evidence of wine in France. Of course, it's Greek. And I couldn't help myself, even with the Burgundy thing, I had to point out that there are bush-trained vines planted like a little forest and it's red and white coconut. So I'm already a little off-piste. I tried to open a sort of standard wine reference to just get normal dates. And I found myself, if you'll allow me, I'll just go on a little. They were telling the story of the ancient history of wine. And so they get to the part where the Romans come up into Gaul and they're like, and the Romans must have seen something there in what is today northern France, as they planted around that golden slope, and the architect, and creating the French wine regions that we still drink today. And so for me, so the golden slope, they're doing a little like cute gesture towards Burgundy's Côte d'Or. And so first evidence of Romans planting grapevines in Burgundy's Côte d'Or is like the 2nd century AD, because that's when they get up there. My 3 things are, that is archaeological evidence, but the slopes weren't planted, they were still forested. Where the Romans planted vines were on the flatlands in the sort of agriculturally productive area, and they were pergola trained. So it's not the same vineyards, they didn't look anything alike. 2, it's not the golden slope, it's the east-facing slope. Côte d'Or is short for Côte d'Orient. And 3, the wines they were making tasted nothing like the wines that we're drinking today, and Pinot Noir didn't exist yet. But so all of which is just to say that the stories that we tell ourselves and how we tell them kind of matter. And so what I want us to do is to taste some wine that I poured you in a small group, or if you've already tasted it, I can pour you a little more. We can pour you a little more because I have helpers. And then we're going to take the sort of our colorful rainbow and collaboratively try to braid it in to the timeline over here. And then the last thing that we're going to do today is look at all the places in the timeline that I forgot to add things. And we're going to add them ourselves if we'd like, which is why you have paper and Sharpies. So that's sort of the plan for the back half of this. Do you want information about the wine on your table before or after you taste it? After? After? Great. Do we all know how to taste wine, more or less? Put a wine in a glass, take a look at it. Hey, this is wine. Stick your nose in the glass, smell a bunch of things. This fermentation's magic. Take a sip. Think about texture and landscape. Feel energy and emotion. Great. Discussion questions you might ask yourself. Do you think that this wine does this wine unlock a specific tradition or gesture towards tradition for you? Do you think an average wine drinker would feel the same way? Where would you put it on this timeline? Are there any things on the rainbow cards that speak to what's in your glass? You can taste and chat first, and then yeah, we're gonna associate afterwards. I realized that from back here, it's actually kind of hard to see.
Oh, those are the ones that.
Yes. There's more than Burgundy and Gaul. What do you guys think? Yeah. What grape do you think it is? You have a grape guess?
I could be way off base, but to me, this reminds me of drinking like Ramato, and like a Trousseau Brie,
Sure.
kind of stemmy,
Yeah.
skin contact, kind of get to it.
Yeah.
There's some bitterness in there, with, like, you know,
That's
not without.
yeah. I think that's a very sensible read on this. It's yeah. I'll say, this is actually co-fermented, and it's whole clusters of a gold skin grape floated in a very thin-skinned red grape juice. So you're kind of getting to that like Ramato, but like from a different direction. What do you guys think? Literally. No. I mean, that's the grape variety that the wine is made out of. It sure is. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, what are you giving me? Yeah. What do you guys think? Cool. Yeah. I pulled this from my fridge at home. This is from last year. Yeah. You know, fooling around. Yeah. One thing for me, for this grape variety specifically, and this is just a personal touchstone, but I grew up with a mulberry tree in my backyard. I often think there's like a mulberry-ish quality to it. What do you guys think? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Were you surprised in the sense of like, did you have expectations around like the Georgian wine of it all or like the import? Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yes. Great. I'm glad. That's why I picked it. What do you guys think? Let's save a little bit of the rest just in case I was. What do you guys think?
That's you.
Oh, sure. Great. Yeah. All right. Are we ready to chat a little bit as a group again? What do we think? How do we feel? I heard a lot of surprise, which is great. There was some hope for that there. Let's start with this side of the room. So you talk about what you tasted, and then I'll tell everybody what it was, and then we can fold in some relevant timeline stuff. How's that? All right, you're in the hot seat.
What I said before.
Yeah.
I'm not making sure. In the line that we tasted, I said me of like a Ramato, or so I said Trousseau Gris because I get a lot of bitterness, heaviness, think about skin contact. But a little bit of fruit in there to kind of keep it rounded. We found out that it is not that. So I'm excited to find out what it is. But that's what I tasted and what it reminded me.
Anybody else on this side? Anybody on this side?
We know what it is, so.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah.
IPA, pretty brown.
Yeah. So we are in northern Lebanon over here. This is a co-ferment of two vinifera varieties native to Lebanon, Merwa and Marini. Some of the Merwa vines that go in here are over 150 years old, own-rooted in vineyards that were largely abandoned in the second half of the 20th century. This is made kind of infusion style. It's, you have whole clusters of one of the grapes floated in juice of the other. So this sort of combination of like rosé and skin contact. I would also say sort of relative to the, 80, 9, 10 of it all, that there's one way to, most wines pre like 1700 probably would have been closer to this color than any other. And this is made by a Palestinian American winemaker named Layla McGrath, who sort of apprenticed in South Australia with a natural winemaker named Anton von Klapper at Lucy Margot, and then moved to Lebanon a couple of years ago and makes natural wine. So. See, I'm pretty sure I have. No, no. Oh my goodness. I originally planned this class with tape. My walls were drapes, which is kind of a powerful metaphor if you think about it. Let's talk over here, because I know I got a time check that was about 10 minutes earlier than I thought it was going to be.
Cool, I got it.
Okay.
Even did with whether like orangey and other, the option really, they want to know.
We talked about like the foxiness thing that we sometimes smell in Labruska grapes that was here, and we sort of compared it to something like a wet riverbedy earthiness that was really pretty. It was delicious and really softly structured on the palate and really bright.
Over on this side of the table. Yeah, awesome. And it is in fact Catawba. From dehydrated grapes, so you can taste over on the side of the room. Catawba was found growing wild in the woods about 15 minutes outside of Asheville, which is where Cleve Urban Winery is based. You want to think about it another way. In the early 1800s, it's a wild hybrid between a wild Labruska vine and what we recently through DNA sequencing found is Semillon, so a Labruska vinifera hybrid. And kind of following its discovery, an innkeeper found it in the woods and planted it next to its inn, and then a guy was riding by who turned out to be a general who became a senator, et cetera. By 1860, it was the most planted wine grape in the United States. So Catawba was the backbone of the 19th century U.S. wine industry. It was sort of the signature. Sparkling champagne method sparkling wines made from Catawba famously got gold medal at a fair in Vienna in 1873, shown at the Paris Exposition near the end of the century. So that's wine number 2. I'm going to grab something, but while I do it, maybe we can go over here, talk about what was in my glass on this side. Yeah, please.
That on the nose had like really powerful, like deep honey smell to it. But also was kind of lighter in body, but also had a little bit of roundness that was really nice. We also spoke about how the tannic structure of it was almost like green stemmy, but softer in a way as well. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I gotta speak to that. Piggyback on what Daniel said. Yeah, I mean, we found over here kind of the same notes. I felt like the honey is now coming out a lot more because when we first had it, it was definitely like more savory, like almost had like this like weird, like not in a good way. It was more like if caramel was not sweet, if that makes any sense, palate, but yeah, and I felt like the palate was just like so different, because like Harrison said, like the acid's really low, but I mean, there's that tannin that actually is like really holding it up more than like what you expect. You would think that this would be like a more acid driven wine, and it's not, which I really, so.
So this was a wine fermented and aged in Qvevri, sort of person-sized clay jars that gesture back to the birth of winemaking. This is from Western Georgia in Imereti. And actually, that's a point I wanted to make, because I heard some surprise around sort of, I think a lot of our, even if we're wine professionals, a lot of our first experiences with Georgian wine are these really intense amber cazzatellis and these really inky, deep, like purple saperavis. And these are as much regional expressions as they are expressions of sort of what the Soviets did in the 1930s, which is a card, but because I'm running out of time, I'm just putting my thumb on the scales. What the Soviets did in the 1930s to Georgian agriculture, where they picked grape varieties and said these belong to these regions. And 80% of Georgian wine comes from Piketi in the east, which is hot and dry and gives you that intensity. But if you punch through the like hour-and-a-half long tunnel through the spine of mountains that cuts the country in half, and you pop out the other side into lower elevation, subtropical, wet, green Imereti with the breeze from the Black Sea coming your way and vines trained in pergola to ward off humidity and fungal diseases, you find both grape varieties like Aladasturi, which is this thin-skinned red vinifera variety, and winemaking styles that are a lot gentler, a lot lighter, a lot fresher than we're used to. In fact, you know, one of the interesting things is this is arguably a regional tradition that's really rooted in community, that nonetheless might strike us at our perception of like what traditional Georgian wine is supposed to taste like might strike us as surprising. Last but not least. Sorry.
Oh, for the internet people, okay. So we had a cider, but there was also sparkling, and I think the thing that really stood out to at least our half of the table was an interesting like dynamic between something that's like so traditional or has like a really long history, which is like cider making, but also the method of making sparkling wine in this particular way. Obviously, there's lots of historical references to carbonated beverages throughout time, but this kind of potentially post-glass multiple fermentation style. So a really interesting mix of kind of like maybe traditional to us today, but has like demarcations across time of different types of like moments in time methods making fermented beverages.
What else on this side of the table? Yeah, please.
I think sorry. A lot of I think what came forward for us is like kind of like a lean mineral, but like floral notes might be happening here. A lot of like white florality to me. And then sort of like as we sort of sift through it and drink through it, there's kind of like a green spice backbone happening here, but also it's yeah, that's it.
Thank you. So that just really quickly, this is sparkling cider. It's a single site cider called Quaker Run from Patois, which you can also taste over there. If you don't get the opportunity here, you're in Madison County, in Virginia, outside of Charlottesville. Apples are sort of and cider really close to my heart. I grew up in Western Michigan. Fruit Ridge is like one of the top 4 apple producing kind of agricultural regions in the US, although everything has sort of been curb stomped by Eastern Washington, irrigated high desert, just like California Central Valley always wins if you're playing the bulk game. But I think apples are sort of an interesting case of a fermented beverage that feels really integral and really apple pie American and is often sold with the label heritage if we're talking about these sort of like minimal intervention styles, but nonetheless is a fruit that was sort of the direct product of transatlantic colonialism, and B, something whose sort of status as a heritage beverage immediately raises the question of whose heritage, which is a question that I know we're already asking. I don't think I have to hit this too hard. What I'd love for us to do with the last bit of our time we have is I try to collate my collapsing timeline. Is think about what's missing and what we hope for the future. What do you want to see in your timeline of wine? What do you want? What things in the past do you want to inform where wine goes in the future? And by wine, I just mean the things that we ferment together. And what do you hope that future looks like? And then we'll talk about it. And then we'll go taste. And then we got the rest of the day ahead of us. If you have a little bit of wine left in your in the bottle that you had at the table, I'd love to keep pours tight and share with as many people who weren't able to taste the wine as possible. And I also have one bottle that didn't get poured out at all, which is a little bit of muscadine from Cleve. Muscadine, of course, being a grape variety, a grape species native to the Southeast, whose history of fermentation really ties into the history of like Black American farming, home winemaking, you know, I think represents something that we can think about what happens when something is communal, leverages what grows locally and in abundance, and what you can make from that. So I'll be going around pouring you little whispers of that as well as we finish off here. Thanks for coming. Next year I'll bring more tape. Have a good rest of the fair. Cheers.